They called her a fraud and cursed her newborn baby right there in the hospital room. The wealthy witch thought she could destroy a humble mother with dark magic. But when that private helicopter landed and her billionaire husband stepped out, the truth about his real identity shattered everything they thought they knew. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever been judged for not having enough money or felt powerless against someone with wealth and influence, this story will give you goosebumps. My name is Sarah, and this is how the darkest moment of my life became the beginning of my greatest triumph. I've always been what people call a simple woman. I work as a night shift nurse at Community General Hospital, taking care of patients who can't afford fancy private rooms. I live in a modest apartment in the older part of town, and my biggest luxury is treating myself to coffee from the nice cafe once a week. I believe in hard work, kindness, and that good things happen to good people. When I met Marcus 2 years ago, he was just another paramedic bringing patients to our emergency room. He had this gentle way of talking to scared patients, always making sure they felt safe during the worst moments of their lives. He drove an old ambulance during his shifts and a beat-up truck on his days off. Everything about him seemed real, down to earth, exactly like the kind of man I'd always hoped to find. We fell in love slowly, naturally. Late-night conversations during shift changes, sharing stories about the patients we'd helped, dreaming about making the world a little bit better. Marcus never tried to impress me with expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. Our dates were walks in the park, cooking dinner together, watching old movies on my tiny television. It was perfect because it was real. When I got pregnant 8 months ago, Marcus proposed with a simple ring he'd saved up for months to buy. We had a quiet courthouse wedding with just 2 witnesses, and I couldn't have been happier. We were building something beautiful together, something based on love and shared values rather than money or status. The problem started when I was 7 months pregnant. That's when I first encountered Victoria Blackwood. She was everything I wasn't. Wealthy, powerful, connected to every important family in the city. She lived in a mansion on the hill, drove luxury cars, and wore jewelry that cost more than I made in a year. But there was something else about Victoria, something that made people whisper when she walked by. People in our small community had stories about Victoria, strange stories. Families who had crossed her found themselves facing unexplained misfortunes. Businesses that competed with her investments mysteriously failed. Children who played too close to her property developed sudden illnesses that doctors couldn't explain. Most people dismissed it as coincidence, but the older nurses at the hospital knew better. They'd seen too much to ignore the pattern. Victoria had a reputation for getting what she wanted, no matter who got hurt in the process. She collected people like trophies, always looking for ways to prove her superiority over those she considered beneath her. When she set her sights on someone, it usually meant trouble was coming. I first met her in the hospital cafeteria during one of her charity visits. These visits were really just photo opportunities for the local newspaper, chances for Victoria to show everyone how generous she was to the poor sick people. She'd walk through the wards with her photographer, handing out expensive gift baskets and making sure everyone saw her writing big checks for the camera. That day, I was on my lunch break, sitting alone at a corner table, reading a pregnancy book, and eating a simple sandwich I'd brought from home. My uniform was clean but old. My shoes were comfortable but worn, and I probably looked exactly like what I was, a working woman trying to take care of herself and her growing baby. Victoria noticed me immediately. She had this way of scanning rooms, identifying who belonged and who didn't, who mattered and who could be dismissed. When her eyes landed on me, I saw something flicker across her face, not just disapproval, something deeper, something that made my skin crawl. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She walked over to my table with that perfectly practiced smile she used for the cameras. "Well, hello there, dear. I don't think we've met. I'm Victoria Blackwood." Her voice was smooth as silk, but there was something underneath it that felt like ice. "I make it my business to know everyone in our little community, especially the hardworking people who keep our hospital running." I introduced myself politely, mentioning that I was a nurse and expecting my first baby. Victoria's smile got wider, but her eyes got colder. "How wonderful for you, dear, your first child. That's such a precious time." You must be so excited to welcome your little one into the world." The way she said it made me uncomfortable, like she was tasting the words, savoring them in a way that felt wrong. She asked about my husband, my family, where we lived, what we did for work. Her questions felt invasive, but she asked them with such charm that refusing to answer would have seemed rude. I told her about Marcus, about our simple life, about how grateful we were for what we had. With each answer, her smile grew more predatory. "How refreshing," she said when I finished. "Such simple dreams, such modest expectations. Not everyone needs luxury and power to be happy, do they? Some people are perfectly content with, well, less." The way she emphasized that last word made it clear she thought being content with less made someone weak, inferior. Before she left, Victoria did something strange. She asked if she could touch my belly to bless the baby. It seemed like an odd request, but plenty of people want to touch pregnant women's bellies, so I didn't think much of it. Her hands were ice cold, and when she placed them on my stomach, I felt the baby kick violently, like it was trying to get away from something. Victoria closed her eyes and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. It sounded like another language, something old and harsh. When she opened her eyes, they seemed different somehow, darker. "Such a strong little one," she said softly. "I hope nothing happens to disturb such a peaceful pregnancy." Sometimes the most innocent babies face the most unexpected challenges. The way she said it sent chills down my spine. It wasn't a blessing. It felt like a warning, or worse, a threat. But when she smiled again and walked away, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones can make you emotional, right? Maybe I was reading too much into a harmless encounter. But over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. I began having nightmares every night, horrible dreams about losing the baby, about dark figures standing over my crib, about shadows moving in the corner of my vision. Marcus would find me sitting up in bed, crying, unable to remember exactly what I'd dreamed but knowing it was terrible. During the day, I felt constantly watched. When I walked to work, I'd catch glimpses of expensive cars driving slowly past my building. When I shopped for groceries, I'd see well-dressed women in dark sunglasses following me through the aisles. When I mentioned it to Marcus, he suggested I was stressed about becoming a new mother. Maybe I was imagining things. The really scary stuff started when I was 8.5 months pregnant. I came home from work one morning to find dead roses scattered outside my apartment door. Not wilted roses that had died naturally, but roses that looked like they'd been burned from the inside out, black and twisted in ways that didn't make sense. When I asked my neighbors if they'd seen who left them, everyone claimed they hadn't noticed anything. A few days later, all the plants in my apartment started dying overnight. Healthy plants I'd been caring for years suddenly turned brown and brittle, like someone had poisoned them. The apartment maintenance man couldn't explain it. He said he'd never seen anything like it, plants dying so quickly without any obvious cause. Then came the phone calls. Every night around midnight, my phone would ring. When I answered, there would be silence for a few seconds, then a woman's voice whispering words I couldn't understand. The voice sounded familiar, but distorted, like it was coming from very far away or through water. Marcus never heard these calls. They only came when he was working the night shift, when I was alone and vulnerable. I started keeping a journal of everything that was happening, partly to track the pattern, and partly to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. The incidents were escalating, becoming more frequent and more frightening. It felt like someone was deliberately trying to terrorize me, to make me feel helpless and afraid during what should have been the happiest time of my life. The worst part was feeling so alone with it all. Marcus was working double shifts to save money for the baby, coming home exhausted and falling asleep immediately. When I tried to explain what was happening, he'd listen patiently, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Not concern for my safety, but concern that the stress of pregnancy was affecting my mental health. My coworkers at the hospital noticed I wasn't myself. I was jumpy, constantly looking over my shoulder, having trouble concentrating on my patients. The older nurses, the ones who'd been working there for decades, started giving me worried looks. Finally, one of them, a woman named Margaret, who'd delivered half the babies in town, pulled me aside. "Honey," she said gently, "I've seen that look before. Someone's been working on you, haven't they? Someone with more money than morals, and a taste for the old ways." When I asked what she meant, Margaret sighed deeply. "Victoria Blackwood's been asking questions about you, dear. Lots of questions. And when Victoria starts asking questions about someone, especially someone carrying a baby, it's never for good reasons." Margaret told me stories I didn't want to believe. Stories about other women Victoria had targeted over the years. Women who'd crossed her path or caught her attention for reasons no one understood. Pregnant women who'd lost their babies unexpectedly. New mothers whose children developed mysterious illnesses. Families who'd been forced to leave town after a series of increasingly dangerous accidents. "She can't stand to see other people happy," Margaret explained. "Especially people she thinks are beneath her. And she's got ways of making sure that happiness doesn't last long. Ways that can't be proven or traced back to her, but ways that work all the same." I wanted to dismiss Margaret's warnings as superstition, but deep down I knew she was telling the truth. Everything that had been happening to me, all the strange incidents and growing sense of dread, suddenly made horrible sense. Victoria hadn't just met me by chance in that cafeteria. She'd sought me out, targeted me for reasons I still didn't understand. As my due date approached, the incidents became more intense and more personal. I'd come home to find my apartment door unlocked when I was certain I'd locked it. Personal items would be moved or go missing entirely. The baby clothes I'd carefully washed and folded would be found torn and scattered across the nursery floor. Someone was getting into my home, violating my safe space, trying to make me feel completely powerless. The night I went into labor, I was more terrified than excited. After months of escalating harassment, I was afraid of what might happen when the baby was finally born. Would Victoria's campaign of terror end, or was this just the beginning of something even worse? Marcus rushed me to the hospital at 3 in the morning when my contractions started coming fast and strong. The labor was intense, but everything seemed normal at first. The nurses I worked with were taking excellent care of me, and Marcus held my hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement and love. But then, just as I was about to start pushing, the hospital room door opened and Victoria Blackwood walked in. She was dressed in an expensive black coat despite the warm weather, and she moved with the confidence of someone who owned the place. Behind her walked the hospital administrator, Dr. Harrison, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge her presence. "I'm here for the Charity Foundation's documentation," Victoria announced smoothly, pulling out a professional-looking camera. "We like to capture the miracle of birth for our annual report. Such inspiring stories of life beginning in our community hospital." Her voice was sweet as honey, but her eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Marcus started to protest, but Dr. Harrison quickly explained that Victoria's foundation had donated millions to the hospital over the years. They couldn't exactly refuse her requests, especially when she framed them as charitable documentation. The nursing staff looked as uncomfortable as I felt, but no one was willing to stand up to the woman who basically funded their paychecks. Victoria positioned herself in the corner where she had a clear view of everything happening. Every time I looked in her direction during my contractions, she was watching me with that same predatory smile from the cafeteria. She wasn't taking pictures for any charity report. She was there for something else entirely, something that terrified me even through the pain of labor. When my daughter Emma was finally born, the room filled with the most beautiful sound in the world, her first cry. She was perfect, healthy, with a full head of dark hair and the strongest little lungs you've ever heard. Marcus was crying with joy, the nurses were congratulating us, and for a moment, I forgot all about the dark presence lurking in the corner. But Victoria wasn't done with us. As the nurses were cleaning Emma and preparing to hand her to me for the first time, Victoria stepped forward with her camera raised. "Such a precious moment," she said loudly. "The first meeting between mother and child. This will make a wonderful addition to our documentation. What happened next still gives me nightmares." As Victoria raised her camera, she began speaking in that same strange language I'd heard in the cafeteria months earlier. The words were harsh and guttural, definitely not English, and they seemed to fill the room with a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Emma, who had been crying lustily since birth, suddenly went completely silent. Not the peaceful quiet of a content baby, but an eerie, unnatural silence that made every nurse in the room freeze. Her little body went rigid in the nurse's arms, and her eyes, which should have been the unfocused gaze of a newborn, seemed to stare directly at Victoria with an expression of pure terror. "What's happening?" Marcus demanded, rushing toward the nurse holding Emma. "Why did she stop crying? Is something wrong?" The head nurse, Linda, was checking Emma's vitals with growing concern. The baby's heart rate had spiked dramatically, her breathing was shallow and rapid, and her tiny body was trembling like she was freezing cold, despite being wrapped in warm blankets. Victoria lowered her camera with a satisfied smile. "Sometimes newborns need a moment to adjust to the world," she said calmly, as if she hadn't just witnessed or caused whatever was happening to my daughter. "The transition from the safety of the womb to the harsh reality of life can be quite shocking for such delicate little beings." But this wasn't normal newborn adjustment. Emma's skin was taking on a grayish tinge, and her breathing was becoming more labored by the minute. Linda quickly called for the pediatric team while another nurse started preparing oxygen equipment. My perfect healthy baby was suddenly fighting for her life, and it had started the exact moment Victoria began her strange chanting. Dr. Harrison tried to maintain professional calm, but I could see the panic in his eyes as he examined Emma. "We need to get her to the NICU immediately," he announced. "Her vitals are dropping rapidly, and we can't determine the cause. This appears to be some kind of sudden onset respiratory distress, but there's no medical explanation for why it would happen to a baby who was perfectly healthy at birth." As they rushed Emma out of the room, Victoria gathered her things with deliberate slowness. She walked over to my bedside, leaning down close enough that only I could hear her whisper. "Some babies are born under lucky stars," she said softly. "Others face challenges that test whether they're truly meant for this world. I do hope your little Emma is strong enough to survive what's coming for her." The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't a coincidence or some unexplained medical emergency. Victoria had done something to my baby, something that couldn't be proven or explained by science, but something real nonetheless. The months of harassment, the strange incidents, the growing sense of dread had all been building to this moment. "You did this," I whispered, my voice shaking with rage and terror. "You hurt my baby. You sick, evil woman, you hurt an innocent newborn." Victoria's smile never wavered. She straightened up and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I understand new mothers can be emotional and irrational, especially when their babies face unexpected health challenges. I'll pray that little Emma finds the strength to overcome whatever obstacles lie ahead." With that, she walked out of the room, leaving behind the smell of expensive perfume, and something else, something that reminded me of burning herbs in old graveyards. The remaining nurses were too focused on preparing me for transport to the NICU to pay attention to what had just happened. But I saw the look in Linda's eyes. She'd been working in this hospital for 30 years, and she knew something unnatural had just occurred. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. Emma was in the NICU, hooked up to machines that monitored every breath, every heartbeat. The next doctors ran test after test but couldn't find any medical reason for her sudden decline. Her lungs were clear, her heart was structurally normal, her blood work showed no signs of infection or genetic disorders. It's as if her body just stopped wanting to live. Dr. Martinez, the head of pediatrics, told us during one of our daily meetings. "We're treating the symptoms, but without understanding the underlying cause, we're essentially guessing at solutions. I've never seen anything quite like this in 20 years of neonatal medicine." Marcus was falling apart. He'd taken time off work to stay at the hospital around the clock, but watching our daughter fight for her life with no explanation was destroying him. "There has to be something," he kept saying. "Babies don't just get sick like this for no reason. Someone has to know what's wrong. Someone has to be able to fix this." I couldn't tell him about Victoria. How could I explain that I believed a wealthy woman had somehow cursed our newborn daughter? It sounded insane even to me. Despite everything I'd witnessed, Marcus was a logical man, a paramedic trained in science and evidence-based medicine. He'd think the stress of Emma's illness was making me paranoid and delusional. But Margaret, the elderly nurse who'd warned me about Victoria months earlier, sought me out during one of my visits to the NICU. She found me in the family waiting room at 2 in the morning, staring through the window at my daughter's tiny form surrounded by machines and wires. "She got to your baby, didn't she?" Margaret said quietly, sitting down beside me. "Victoria was here the night Emma was born. I heard about her little photography session. And now your perfect, healthy baby is fighting for her life with no medical explanation." Margaret's voice was filled with a sadness that spoke of years of witnessing Victoria's cruelty. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered, finally having someone who understood what was really happening. "How do you fight someone who can do things like this? How do you protect your child from something that doctors can't even acknowledge exists?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at Emma through the glass. "There are ways," she said finally. "Old ways, older than Victoria's money and influence. But they require courage, and they require believing in things that most people have forgotten. More importantly, they require help from someone with power of their own, someone who can match what Victoria brings to the fight." Margaret told me about others who'd faced Victoria's wrath over the years and survived. The ones who made it through had one thing in common, she explained. They had protection, real protection, from someone Victoria couldn't intimidate or destroy. Someone with resources and connections that even she had to respect. "I don't know anyone like that," I said desperately. "Marcus and we're just working people. We don't have wealthy friends or powerful connections. We're exactly the kind of people Victoria targets because she knows we can't fight back." Margaret studied my face carefully. "Are you sure about that, dear? Sometimes the people closest to us have depths we've never explored. Sometimes the most humble people have the most surprising secrets." I thought about Marcus, about how little I actually knew about his life before we met. He'd always been vague about his family, claiming they were estranged, and he preferred not to talk about them. He'd mentioned growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes, learning to rely only on himself. I'd assumed his reluctance to discuss his past meant it was painful, filled with poverty and abandonment. But what if there was more to the story? What if Marcus had reasons beyond emotional pain for keeping his background secret? Margaret seemed to sense my thoughts shifting. Sometimes people choose simple lives not because they have to, but because they want to. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who've learned that real strength comes from serving others, not ruling over them. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. When Marcus arrived for his morning visit to the NICU, I was waiting for him in the hallway instead of sitting by Emma's bedside. "We need to talk," I said firmly. "Really talk, about everything we've never discussed. About your family, your past, about why a woman like Victoria Blackwood would target us specifically." Marcus looked confused and exhausted. Emma's condition had been declining slowly but steadily, and the doctors were starting to use words like palliative care and making her comfortable. "Sarah, I don't understand what you're asking. What does my family have to do with what's happening to Emma? The doctors said this is just some rare, unexplained condition." "The doctors don't know what they're dealing with," I said quietly. "But I do. And I think, somewhere deep down, you do too. Victoria Blackwood did something to our daughter, something that can't be proven or explained by medical science. And I think she chose us for reasons that go beyond just random cruelty." I told Marcus everything. The months of harassment, the strange incidents, Victoria's presence during Emma's birth, the unnatural way our healthy baby had suddenly become critically ill the moment Victoria started her chanting. I watched his face as I spoke, seeing recognition flicker in his eyes, even as he tried to deny what I was telling him. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "People can't just curse babies. This isn't some medieval fairy tale, Sarah. There has to be a rational explanation for what's happening to Emma." But even as he said the words, I could see doubt creeping into his expression. "Marcus," I said gently, taking his hands in mine, "I need you to tell me the truth about who you really are, about your family, your background, about why you chose to live such a simple life when maybe you didn't have to. Because if we are going to save our daughter, I need to know everything." The mask finally cracked. Marcus looked away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of secrets he'd been carrying for years. "My real name isn't Marcus Thompson," he said quietly. "It's Marcus Blackwood. Victoria is my aunt, and my family owns half the businesses in this state. I walked away from all of it when I turned 18 because I wanted to build a life based on who I was, not what I inherited. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, but suddenly everything made sense. Victoria's interest in me, her questions about my husband, her escalating campaign of terror. She hadn't been targeting me randomly. She'd been trying to destroy the life her nephew had built away from the family's influence and control. She knows, I whispered. She's known all along who you really are, and she's been punishing me for taking you away from the family empire. Emma isn't just an innocent victim caught in the crossfire. She's Victoria's way of forcing you to come back, to choose between your daughter's life and your independence. Marcus looked broken, devastated by the realization that his choices had put his wife and daughter in danger. I thought I could escape, he said. I thought if I changed my name, took simple jobs, lived quietly, they'd eventually forget about me and move on. I never imagined Victoria would go this far, would hurt an innocent baby to get to me. But now we know, I said, feeling strength returning to my voice for the first time in months. Now we know what we're really fighting and why. And more importantly, we know you have resources, connections, power that can match what Victoria brings to this fight. The question is, are you willing to use them to save our daughter? Marcus straightened up, and for the first time since Emma's birth, I saw real determination in his eyes. I gave up that world to protect my soul, he said firmly, but I'll burn it all down if that's what it takes to save my family. He pulled out a phone I'd never seen before, an expensive device that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a paramedic's pocket. I need to make some calls, he said, his voice taking on an authority I'd never heard before. People who owe me favors, people who've been waiting years for me to come back and claim what's mine. If Victoria wants to play power games with our daughter's life, she's about to learn that some family feuds are more dangerous than she remembered. As Marcus walked away to make his calls, I felt hope stirring in my chest for the first time since Emma's birth. Margaret had been right about people having hidden depths, about the most humble individuals sometimes carrying the most surprising secrets. My simple paramedic husband was about to remind his family why they'd never stopped trying to bring him home. Victoria thought she'd been playing with helpless victims, easy targets who couldn't fight back against her wealth and influence. But she'd made a critical mistake. She'd targeted the woman married to the one person in her own family who had both the power and the motivation to destroy everything she'd built. The real battle was just beginning, and this time, we weren't going to be the ones left powerless and afraid. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from having something worth fighting for, and there was nothing in the world worth fighting for more than our daughter's life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.